The Drake Group Education Fund is dedicated to educating the public and professionals in our business with fact-based information featuring the experts in our profession so that we might all do a better job of helping college athletes realize the promise of an educational degree and becoming all they can be as students and athletes, as well as the athletics administrators who are managing these programs. So we welcome you to our 49th webinar. Thank you to all of our panelists for their time, expertise, and ideas, and thanks to all of you for attending. Webinars provide us with the opportunity to share new ideas, recalibrate our thinking on issues, and get up to date on important topics. So we're pleased to have you join us. Lastly, before you meet our moderator and panelists, I just want to emphasize that our speakers are expressing their own opinions and not the opinions of the organizations in which they are employed or are members, unless they make that distinction in their remarks. Now, I'm honored to introduce the moderator of today's program. Please meet Robert Boland, Professor of Law at Seton Hall University and law partner and co-chair of the Leisure, Hospitality, and Sports Business Service Practice at Schumacher, Loop & Kendrick, a top national sports law firm, and my good friend. It's all yours, Bob.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Drake Group. You also could add that I am a Drake Group member. I will add one biographical note to my background that is maybe not unusual, but for 5 years, I think I had the most unusual job in the world. I was the athletic integrity officer at Penn State after the Sandusky crisis. So I know about running into a burning building upon occasion, or at least one that had been burned. We have an amazing group of panelists, and I'm going to undo them justice. But I think that the way to best engage the beginning of the conversation that we're going to have for the next 90 minutes or so, of course, with questions from the audience, is going to be to ask them to briefly introduce themselves and maybe share for a second what they'd like to achieve out of today's conversation. So I'm going to go to Kim and Mark Holinsky first. And your reason, and let you introduce yourself, tell a bit about yourself and what you'd like to share in today's conversation.
We both are talkers, right? So I'm going to go first, and I'll just tell you why Holinsky's Hope is Holinsky's Hope. We lost our beautiful son, Tyler, at 21 years of age to suicide. He was a quarterback at Washington State University, go Cougs, and the sweetest, kindest, amazing athlete, just super, just amazing between the lines and on the football field. And we had no idea that he was struggling with his mental health. He never reached out and asked for help. He never shared that he was struggling. We think it may have been the stigma that was attached to mental illness. There's another side to why we think Tyler passed. We don't share that in our Tyler Talks, which we just finished one here in Iowa, and I'll let Mark tell you a little bit about that.
So very quickly, Tyler was diagnosed post-mortem with stage 1 CTE. It's a confusing diagnosis for his family. Obviously, one of our panelists, Dr. Hainline, we got to share our sadness and our story with him, and he was very kind and shared the latest research and so forth. And we do this for 24/7, 365 days a year, and we miss him every day. But it's incredible to me, 7 years later, we know even less. We're excited to know that the group out of Minnesota, Oculogica, got the patent for received a patent for testing in the living. The tests are not ready yet. They received some patent work there. So we know that there's progress. But we're here to represent, the parents of student athletes and athletes across the country and around the world that are struggling to understand what this means for them and what they can do to protect their children.
Thank you so much. Mark and Kim, a pleasure. I'm going to go to Dr. Desiree Bird. Dr. Bird, would you share a little bit about your background and what you'd hope to share with us today?
Absolutely. So happy to be here. And my condolences. This is my first time meeting the Helinski family. Thank you for utilizing your experience to make a change for parents of and families of other student athletes. I wish for more of that around the globe. So I am a board certified neuropsychologist. I'm duly appointed in the Department of Neurology at the Mount Sinai Medical School and at the CUNY, City University of New York Graduate Center and Queens College, where I interface with undergraduates and doctoral students. I've been involved in the assessment of brain-related injuries since the 90s in graduate school when my supervisor was working with the Chargers at the time, before CTE was even on the map. So I've developed an expertise in neuropsychological assessment with a special emphasis to etiologic background factors that influence that measurement. It's a tricky measurement. I hope today to spread awareness about the role of neuropsychological testing, which is not a biomarker. Obviously, it's not a brain scan, but it's something that is more accessible and can track performance over time. And so there are a lot of nuances involved with neuropsych assessment, but my goal today is to be a resource to the panelists and the participants here and to increase awareness and hopefully generate interest in college campuses that don't currently have any neuropsychological evaluation as a part of their support for student athletes. I think that'll do it for me, Bob. Thanks.
That is an incredible bit of questioning, and I can't wait to get into it with you. Dr. Heinlein, I know that you have walked into some difficult assignments in your career too. We were faculty members at NYU a decade or so ago. I've moved on a little bit. You've taken a lot of really important assignments. Tell us about those, and tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and the state of your research as a neurologist. And you're on mute, doctor. I hate to say that.
Yeah, it was the first time I've ever been on Zoom. No,
That's great.
yeah, thanks so much, and thanks to the Drake Group. So, I'm Brian Heinlein. I'm a neurologist, and I continue to serve as clinical professor of neurology at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. My work there is primarily as a teacher to the residents and with doing grand rounds. I'm no longer practicing clinical medicine. I think another important part of who I am is I'm friends with Mark and Kim Helinski, and I say that because they reached out to me shortly after Tyler died by suicide, and at that time I was serving as chief medical officer of the NCAA. So I was the NCAA's first chief medical officer, started in 2013 and went through the end of 2014. And of note, the NCAA was only the second sport organization in the entire world to hire a full-time chief medical officer. So they really were at the cutting edge of trying to get to a more science-based approach to health and safety for student athletes. And with Mark and Kim, we really took a journey together that continues, that focused really on mental health and student athletes and all of the things that can contribute to mental health. So not just the society that one is in, the pressures of students, the pressures of athletes, and even the potential impact of repetitive head impact exposure, and if that might have anything to do with mental health as well. So we've explored all of those together, and I've continued in that work. Of note, with the NCAA, I was co-architect of the NCAA Department of Defense Care Consortium study. And that's the largest prospective longitudinal study ever done in history. And it's looking, we're following prospectively, ideally over 25 plus years, 55,000 student athletes and cadets from all 24 NCAA sports. And we're really now measuring predictors of brain health and cognitive health, but there's a heavy focus on following those who have had exposure to concussion and to repetitive head impact exposure with very advanced biomarkers. In terms of what I'm doing right now, I'm no longer working with the NCAA, and a lot of my work is focused on mental health. In fact, I'm leaving in a couple hours for Edinburgh, Scotland, for an ILC-sponsored conference on mental health and elite athletes. And I'm the co-chair of the second International Olympic Committee Summit on Mental Health and Elite Athletes. We met this summer. We've really been meeting for the past year and a half, and we're now putting together what we hope will be the definitive consensus paper on mental health and elite athletes from a management point of view and a cause and effect point of view. And we hope that that will be published in the spring of 2026.
Thank you. Amazing, amazing panelists. I think the thing that you've already focused on and probably takes the root of my first question that is a bit of a jump ball for anyone who wants to take it is I think the germination of this panel came after the attack at the NFL headquarters in August, the idea that vaulted CTE back into the primary focus of the news media and others. And the question I think that we would all ask, and each of you have touched on it, that and maybe something I believed as a former football player and an attorney and as a professor going forward, that CTE is or the issue of chronic brain trauma or repeated blows to the head or concussion is a much larger issue intertwined with other things, including mental health. And we'll talk about the science, we'll get into it, but each of you have talked about the mental health aspect of this, and I'd love to hear you go a little deeper into that and the challenges athletes are facing. So anyone who wants to take that and talk about that and how they relate, I'd love to hear that.
Well, I'll just quickly tell you that. So we do these Tyler Talks. We've done 400 of them over the last 7 years. And they're mostly with student athletes, and we hear so much from them and the pressures that they're under and the struggles and they're students first, right? Then they're dealing with NIL, COVID, the transfer portal, social media, which is just so rough. They have their sport, and a lot of them are anxious. Sometimes they get depressed after a loss. And I do think that there's a lot that weigh on their mental health. And Mark and I, we just hear stories like that all the time. And I think they're spinning these plates and they're just so afraid that they're going to drop most of them.
Yeah, I would just add, Bob, that, when we started this, 7 years ago or so, resources were one of the bigger issues. We worried about, do the kids have access to the right tools, the right people, and so forth. And while that continues to surprise us in a positive way, that more resources are afforded this particular area, our own particular point of view, because Tyler never asked for help, never told anybody he was struggling, we need to really focus on the student athlete and get them to a point of being able to share that. So they don't feel stigmatized. They're not worried about playing time. And through our travels, as Kim pointed out, we've 400 plus campuses anymore. And certain, not all of those are the same, but so many of them give us hope. These are some of our brightest, hardest working young people in the country, and we're honored to ever be part of it. But the amount of work that they think they're capable of is astonishing. And so we do a lot of work around or talk around mental and physical health equilibrium. You wouldn't try to, God forbid, you struck with a cancer or liver disease or something, you wouldn't try to fix that yourself. You wouldn't pray harder to get better. You would do those things, but in addition to those, you would seek guidance and professional help and so forth. And so the message we continue to share sort of on Tyler's behalf and for everybody else that isn't Kevin Love and some of our wonderful, amazing professional athletes talking about their resilience and how hard they have had to work to continue in their lives while they're struggling with mental health. Tyler doesn't get to tell his story, and we're here to represent him and others that at the time you need to the most trust others. Your brain is the one that is fading or is under attack. It might not be you're not the best person to do that. So what do? Encourage their teammates, their coaches, their staff to look and observe those signs, see something, say something, have these conversations out in the open, all for the betterment of their mental health, but their lifelong health as well.
Mark said something brilliant. I want to go to Dr. Bird about this. he talked about the brain being under attack. And your expertise in neuropsychological assessment gives us some baseline and thought about how the brain functions and how the brain responds when someone is spinning all the plates that young athletes are in college. Could you talk a little bit about what's involved in neuropsychological assessment, what tools you use, and what it can show in related both to CTE but related to overall mental health for young people?
Absolutely. Neuropsychologists are it's a unique subspecialty within the larger umbrella of psychology. And neuropsychologists are trained in brain behavior relationships. So a lot of classes on neurochemistry, neuroanatomy, and so forth. And then other modules on clinical psychology and psychopathology and so forth. And so neuropsychological assessments include in-depth review of background factors so that we understand it's a more holistic like approach rather than like what is the specific like symptom right now and how severe is it. It's like what are you bringing to this assessment, what happened before this injury, whatever the injury is, happened. And since we are trained in the factors that can impact cognition, we query those developmentally, socially, psychiatrically, and so forth. Then our toolkit, aside from interview and review of records, is a set of tests, whether they be computerized or manual, that have been validated to infer or communicate about the integrity of the brain in terms of memory, executive functioning, attention, and so forth. And so then after an assessment is complete, we integrate all of that information with the science that we know about various conditions, and then come up with what we believe is a decision about whether or not there's cognitive dysfunction, how severe it is, and what the likely etiology is, and then what to do about it. And so I think in general, aside from an educational piece, especially for student athletes who are managing an educational demand, of course, a neuropsychological evaluation sometimes uncovers previously undiagnosed learning conditions, which then can afford the student athlete accommodations in the classroom that support their learning so that then that one plate that they're spinning with regards to their grades gets a boost that they may not have even been looking for. So there are multiple components, beneficial components to a neuropsychological evaluation, but that's the way I would summarize it.
So it's advanced a little bit from where I played college football in the 1980s, and they asked me a series of questions pre-concussion in hopes they could evaluate me post-concussion. It's a much deeper and more serious treatment plan.
Absolutely. An assessment plan primarily, and then in conjunction with other professionals, a treatment plan. But yes, it has advanced beyond just pre-post. That is still valuable though, because without a preseason, during season comparison, we have to then compare people to folks who aren't athletes at all and maybe who come from another region of the country. And so the idea of what the best comparison group is does become relevant. And when that data is available, pre-season, ideally it would be pre-sport, but for people who've been playing since they were 5 years old, that's impossible. So a pre-season is a good grounding, like an anchor point if it's available. But yes, we are beyond that. Thank you.
That's great. Dr. Heinlein, a question to you and really following up on what we just asked Dr. Bird, from your position, how have we advanced since the time you took the job at the NCAA? What's improved in our understanding here, and what are you most proud of in that space?
Well, thanks. I first just want to comment on Dr. Bird's response and just to emphasize how incredibly important neuropsychologists are. They really provide comprehensive answers when someone might be struggling and they think they have simply a psychological problem, not simply, but a psychological problem, but it might be interlinked with a medical problem or a learning disorder. And so it really is a phenomenal resource. In terms of what's advanced, I think a few things. So one is, and I'll just plant this seed and we'll get into the science later, we no longer use the word CTE alone. So the science has told us that when we talk about CTE, we call it CTE-PD, so PC. So CTE, neuropathological change. So we know there's an evolving understanding of the pathology that we're now calling CTE,
Mm.
which is different from what we used to call CTE in the literature from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And we're trying now to understand, is there a correlation with these pathological changes and how someone might manifest? And that's through a hypothetical construct called traumatic encephalopathy syndrome, TES. And people like Dr. Bird are experts in helping us to understand that. And so we're in the sort of gathering science stage of trying to correlate pathology with symptoms. And right now, we don't have that correlation. In fact, the latest science that has come out was pretty definitive that we do not understand the exact correlation or really any correlation between the pathology and how someone might manifest behaviorally. But in terms of what's evolved, and I will say much of this has come from people like the Helinskis who have changed the perceived norms of what really should be happening on a campus. So when Mark and Kim are talking about an increased awareness and the buddy system and so forth, that wasn't the case even 5 years ago, certainly not 10 years ago. I remember the first meeting I had as chief medical officer of the NCAA. My first meeting was with the Student Athlete Advisory Committee members nationally from D1, D2, and D3. And they all said to me, and I don't think this was a setup, they said, look, Dr. Hainline, we know you're a neurologist, we get concussion, but please make mental health your priority. So what's advanced, and I say this with some pride, not because of what I've done, but because of what the community has done. And where I'm actually leaving, as I said, in a couple hours, we're going to be talking about this in Edinburgh, Scotland, and writing about it in the paper. So the NCAA came up with what's called an NCAA mental health best practices, endorsed by 25 of the leading organizations in the country. And they said that, and this is legislation. I mean, think about that. The NCAA has said that every campus must be putting in place four things. One is creating an environment that supports mental health care seeking and mental wellness. Number two, identifying and rehearsing routine and emergency mental health action plans. Number three, doing screening. So, we already talked about, Mark and Kim, and we've shared these stories, and Tyler's silence. But was he in an environment which encouraged mental health care seeking? I mean, we don't know. I can't speak for that. And was there any mental health screening going on? I can almost certainly answer that the answer to that is no. And then the fourth part of the NCAA mental health best practices is that you identify preemptively who are the licensed mental health care providers that all student athletes have access to. And I say this for two reasons. One is the reason I got involved in the International Olympic Committee, their summit on mental health and elite athletes, their first one in 2018, and now this one that we're part of right now, is because they saw the NCAA mental health best practices and they said that should become a platform for the world.
Mm.
So that I think we can all be proud of. But the question, and let me get to the screening. For the first time, and so what we're identifying as part of the IOC second summit on mental health and elite athletes, the first summit actually came out with what's called the Sports Mental Health Assessment Tool. It's the first sport-specific screening tool ever developed. And what we have spent the last year and a half doing is validating that tool. And so I'm very happy to announce that in around April 2026, there's going to be the SMOT 2, so the Sports Mental Health Assessment Tool 2, sort of like the SCAT 1, SCAT 2, now we have the SCAT 6. And so that has been validated, and we're hoping that's going to be used not just once a year, but multiple times a year. There are times when you really should selectively be screening different athletes, maybe after they've been cut from a team, maybe after they've had a devastating loss, either at home or what they perceive as a devastating loss on the field. There's been a change in life event. So all of that's key. So that's one important thing. But the second is, who is independently assessing whether all of the schools are putting this into place? And I will tell you that the United States Olympic Committee and Paralympic Committee has contracted out with an independent organization, and now none of the 50 national governing bodies of the USOPC can participate in the Olympics if they don't pass this independent assessment by the U.S. Council on Athletes' Health. So that is something that the USOPC has openly embraced, and the question, and about 300 NCAA member schools have. But the question is, do we really have a watchdog or an independent accreditor or an assessor? Because the NCAA, for many reasons, which include medical, legal, and Bob, you might appreciate that, they can't go in and assess a member school, but can we have a system in which they can be assessed?
Well, as somebody who's been in a watchdog role, I understand how challenging that can be to build that and establish it. I wanted to go to a question I think most people who probably came here and are listening to this session probably have in mind. And I don't think any of you have answered it in the way that would be expected. So I wanted to kind of throw this back, and maybe I'll go to the Helinskis first. You lost your son as a football player, and a lot of us think that as college football and pro football in particular, and I'm a former college football player who spent my life in and around the sport. We all think that it's the economic driver of the business. It's the thing that's accelerating our change probably more than anything else. The NFL is the biggest sport business and maybe cultural phenomenon in our society. But is this a situation where football is the only issue here, or is it a football issue, or is it a much larger issue? And Kim and Mark, I might start there with you.
Yeah, I mean, Bob, I think anecdotally, right, as we continue to encourage our student athletes to avail themselves of the resources and tools and education around them, it's very clear to us because they tend to share, right? To put this in context, we share a story for about an hour, and then we stand around for another 90 minutes as some of the student athletes, some of the coaches, others in attendance want to come and share their story, right? They're not intimidated by us, of course, because we're not trained to do any of the actual work, but we can listen, and we've been through that pain and experience, so we get that. I don't want to rattle off the laundry list of every sport at the collegiate level is an active combatant sport. I used to laugh and think, basketball, oh, come on. I was a basketball player. You play in shorts and t-shirts and tennis shoes, and come on. Now you watch any level, high school included. So women's and men's soccer, there is violent collisions on the field. So yes, obviously there's a helmet involved. You've got lacrosse that is making great gains in terms of its participation. There's plenty of sports outside of football that I think we've heard from student athletes that are concerned about CTE, what they've read, what they understand it to be, certainly the scary end to so many well-known athletes and how they've avoided taking their lives and hurting their brain so it can be analyzed. And so a lot of the questions, some know that Tyler had CTE. We don't, as Kim mentioned, we don't make that a point of our discussion, but they come from sports well beyond football.
Thank you. Dr. Bird, could you speak to that a little bit and some of the issues that maybe are facing the collegiate sports environment across the board?
Absolutely. It is not just a football issue. Football may be at the forefront for some of the reasons that you referenced. And for the obvious reasons, it's easy to think about brain health and football given, and boxing. Okay. But we're talking about more than just, concussion right now, actually. And the pressures, the mental health landscape, the difficulties there, and the lack of current, like a robustness in the response to the needs of the mental health of student athletes is across the board. So, and I think it spans public campuses, private campuses, and so forth. I am encouraged by not only what Dr. Hainline mentioned, but some of what I know about some of my colleagues who've received grants to hire dedicated sports psychologists. So not 2 hours from the campus psychologist, but sports psychologists who are integrated, who are hanging out in the locker rooms, who are sitting on the sidelines at practices so that they're a part of the team. So again, that it's integrated. And for the attention to digital technologies, we cannot ignore the fact that many college students are entrusting their most deepest secrets to chatbots and to artificial intelligence. So what can sports psychology do to leverage that platform to identify people who are at risk and intervene perhaps? So I think the time is really sweet. I'm feeling encouraged, but yes, it spans absolutely far beyond football. Thank you.
Dr. Hainline, I'm going to let you respond to that too, because I'm anticipating you're going to have some color to add to that, and then I'll have a question from the audience for you.
Well, I'll add personal color. Actually, Kim and Mark, I'm not even sure I shared this with you. I was a very reluctant sharer in my travels as NCAA chief medical officer, but I actually lost my scholarship my junior year of college. I ended up playing #1 at Notre Dame in tennis in singles and doubles, but I quit the team my junior year because I was profoundly depressed, but I didn't know that I was depressed. And quite frankly, in many ways, I'm fortunate to be alive right now. And so, and that was a personal journey, which is why I've been very, very involved in mental health, because it impacted me so much. But I think going back to the whole sport system and what we're talking about, I guess I want to go on this theme, and that's the environment that you're in. So one of the most important research clues that we've come up with lately, evidence-based, is that you can have no history of a mental health disorder, but if you're in a toxic environment, you will languish.
Mm.
On the other hand, you can have a diagnosed mental health disorder, and if you're in a supportive environment, you can thrive. And so much of it now is about the environment and how and coaches, we can get down on coaches and say it's just about the wins and losses, but the coaches I know, the vast majority of them, they're in the human development business, but they're also incredibly data driven. And when we show them the data about the environment and its impact, not only on the human being, but on performance, because after all, we are interested in performance in the sport world, they stop what they're doing and they listen. When we tell them the importance of sleep, on the other hand, the converse, if you're sleep deprived, how you're more likely to have suicidal thoughts, how your performance is likely to go down, how your tennis serve accuracy will go down. So there's all of these things that we now have more and more evidence for, and that I think the most important thing we can do is arm our coaches with that, but also have a way of helping schools to be compliant so that they're putting in all of the best practices that we know and that indeed are legislated across every single NCAA member school from a mental health best practices point of view.
Dr.
And I
Hainline,
was going to
go
add
ahead.
just
Go ahead,
really
please.
quick, if I can. So we go to so many different campuses, and we see some that are just resource wealthy and some that just have one mental health professional for the entire student body. And it's just, and I hear what you're saying, Doc, that we love that the resources are there, but it's heartbreaking to see that some campuses only have one mental health professional, not even a sports psychologist. And I don't know how to address that other than it's a financial thing.
And when we put out our mental health best practices, we said these should be resource independent. In other words, if you're an NCAA member school, you should be able to provide the resources that really, from a legislative constitutional point of view, that allow you to address the health, safety, and performance of every single athlete. But I'll take your comment, Kim, and go one step further, and would love to hear Dr. Bird's take on this too, because I know some of the background work she's done in terms of really looking at cultural influencers from a neuropsychological and psychological point of view. Our country doesn't have enough licensed mental health providers. And we certainly don't have enough licensed mental health care providers to address the Americans that are America. They don't look like the Americans that are America. And those resources are continually being taken away from us right now at a very rapid pace, especially during the past year. And so it's an NCAA issue, it's a high school issue, it's a country issue. So that's a very larger issue. But getting back to your point, Kim, I think my opinion, if you have an athletic program, you need to really look at what your resources and say, am I giving all the resources that are necessary for me to call myself an NCAA member school?
I had the pleasure recently of hosting a panel discussion with two of my closest friends who are performance psychology experts embedded in college campuses over a number of years. And they talked about the value of their embeddedness and their ability to engage with athletes. But one of the challenges I think we hear a lot, and I'd love to get your reaction to it as a whole, is that once I've developed a problem or diagnosed a problem or sought help, there's not another person there to help me. It takes weeks sometimes to get an appointment, to get an assessment. The challenge may be the gap between coming forward and maybe surfacing a problem and then the end point of getting some help. And I think Dr. Hinline, you spoke to that. Dr. Bird, are there some unique challenges in that space? And are there, and I think Dr. Hinline teed it up, are there cultural challenges too?
Yes, absolutely. That gap problem that you mentioned is one that I think is ripe for digital technologies. It is possible that perhaps there's some emerging data to suggest that text-based intervention, not as as the only intervention, but as a support to fill in gaps, um, can be quite effective to hold people over and to get them to an emergency room if things escalate to that point, and may help triage, like push them up, in the triage. So I think digital technologies can be leveraged to help fill that gap. And then on the cultural piece, absolutely. I work at on Queens College, which is one of the most diverse campuses in the world, and you don't know the value of students who come from countries or who speak different languages, seeing professors, providers who share a portion of their identity, and immediately, like you see, like a like a relief, like okay. And so there are some state-based interventions that's making some inroads in that way. New York State has been wonderful in that regard, but it still feels like a drop in the bucket. I sit on admissions committees, so I know who's applying. I know who's getting in, how long it takes them to get through. I sit on the board of accreditation committee at the other end, so professionals who are looking to be board certified and have some sense of who's coming in. So we have not moved that needle far enough. And so it stands, there's a great need there. And I'm thinking about how many professionals I know in my field who are former athletes. There aren't a ton. I'm a part of the Men's Brain Health Initiative. We hold events during Super Bowl week in the Super Bowl cities to bring greater attention to brain health and research. There are a lot of former athletes there, but there should be some special recruitments to get student athletes into the mental health field, right? Absolutely. So I have tons of ideas about ways to do that. I know that's not the focus today, but I'll just
Would,
pause with that comment.
would you share one or two?
What ideas?
Yeah.
It just takes money. That's all they need. If there is money to cover training, there are so many of us that are ready to do the recruitment, the screening, the preparation to start the pipeline. It's the cost of graduate education in this country that is the defining, the limiting factor.
And you bring up a really interesting point in this moment that we're extending college and eligibility oftentimes for athletes. We're including the opportunity for graduate education. And having led sports management programs around the country, I hundreds of athletes seek me out for help with that. But I don't know of any athlete or very few athletes who said, I want to really go into psychological counseling or I want to be able to provide that answer. And I always love that the experience of having been an athlete seems relevant in that way. They would be able to use their own, both their identity and their experience positively. Is that something we could be facilitating in a better way?
Absolutely. And I think that on the other end, once you said that you haven't interfaced with many who said, I want to become a psychologist. After thinking about the money they could have made in professional sports, the meager income of mental health professionals is probably discouraging. But I think with targeted intervention in terms of tapping into their passion and like how this is a job that you can do best. So there are ways we can, get around that. And I'm sorry, I forgot where your question
I think you
centered.
answered it brilliantly. I
Oh,
would
okay.
ask for some examples and some for instances. I'm going to go to an audience question, and it's on point. I'll read a portion of it, and it says that as a social worker, I want to revisit the first question. And Dr. Hainline, have you explored the financial pressures of playing college sports? I'm curious whether injuries might be addressed, identified, prevented earlier if students weren't under the pressure to play, maintain a scholarship, get NIL money, the challenges that are coming in that way. Is there a way to functionally take that pressure off? And having worked at both at an Ivy League school and played at an Ivy League school where that pressure was somewhat relieved, that you weren't going to have to leave the school if you stopped playing. The challenge I see having gone to a scholarship program is that was often a big challenge. Is there a way to limit the pressure of making someone a prisoner of their scholarship, or the challenges of performance that affect young people so unevenly?
Well, that's an incredibly insightful question. And it is one that we have addressed. I'll start it by giving an answer that a really famous athletic director, he and I were speaking at a forum, and he said, the problem with college sports at the great institution I'm at is that the majority of athletes, they arrive, they have their scholarship, they already have their prize, and they have no more passion, and they're just wondering, what to do next, and then they fall into all sorts of issues. And so that sort of gets to our whole youth sport model, which we don't spend enough time talking about. And I'll say this very, very clearly. The United States is one of the few countries in the entire world that does not have a minister of sport. And the USOPC, which in the 1978 Ted Stevens Act was supposed to be kind of the overseer of all of youth sport, they are not, because they can't be. And George Steinbrecher made sure that they weren't. He wanted to just focus on the most elite. So we have this disarray really in the youth sport world, and we have these sorts of prizes that we call college scholarships, and so much money is put into youth sports, and we have a model in which kids are specializing way too early. We aren't addressing their developmental needs. Every one of the 50 national governing bodies of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee are signatories to the American Development Model, which means that at every point of your development, you should be doing what is psychologically, physically, socially, and spiritually appropriate. We aren't following that in our country. And so, yes, the financial pressures are incredible, and it is because of that prize that people are going for, that the ultimate scholarship. And I think we meaning at the collegiate level, I think that there are some solutions, financial solutions. And part of that, I don't know that we want to get into an NIL discussion, but part of that is we're addressing athletes making more money, but are we addressing their social and spiritual and mental health in that? And I don't think that has been thoroughly studied. But I would go back to that very insightful question and look at us as a society and compare us to Norway, which won more gold medals in the Winter Olympics than any other country on the planet. And look at their youth development model. It is exceptional.
One of my former colleagues from Penn State raises a question, and you've touched around it, so I'll acknowledge the question. And it talks about the amount of work that coaches are putting in, and the competitive pressures that they do, and the challenges of a lack of certification in some cases for, or training in psychology or physiology that they're suffering. And it talks a little bit about overuse and other injuries, and it resonates with me as a question largely because I have a rotator cuff injury that I'm going to have to probably replace my shoulder at some point if I can keep my tennis game going from my football days. And God, I'm just hoping shoulder advancements keep coming. But the idea that we've made college sports so organized, so repetitive, so challenging, and in some cases so big money, you've sort of answered. But I wanted to come to the Helinskis a little bit about that. Could we do better if we had smarter coaches? Could we do better if we had more skilled coaches? Could we do better if we ratcheted the time and effort back in any way? Because you're on the front line seeing that.
Yeah, it's a great question, Bob. And I tell you, one of the great pleasures of doing this work is being able to visit with and interface with the athletic director staff and then the coaching staff at the different universities within the different programs. And I will tell you that Kim and I both feel very strongly that the coaches have improved considerably from our view. Number one, in access. Number two, in information education. Number three, in advocating for their student athletes in general. The research that has me most concerned, to be certain, and this sort of ties to coaching and programming in the universities in general, is this. And forgive me, Dr. Hainline, if I misquote this, but there's a study out that shows that, or that shares that nearly 50% of our athletes on campus prefer not to treat their mental health within the confines of the university. And I will add our own 2 cents that the experiences that we've had simply go back to, we want to keep that information to ourselves. We don't want our coaching staff to know that because it will not necessarily be used against us, but it won't help us in any way. And Kim and I both sit there and think that's such a giant number. So we're pushing invest in your kids, invest in the mental health resources on campus, educate your student athletes, and yet 50% of them are distrusting and therefore potentially won't get any of the help that they need because for many of the things that the panels talked about, including financial. So that is one of, there's a list, right? But that's one of the big issues. And so that naturally refers back to a coaching scenario, right? Well, I'm afraid if I share information with my campus, my coach will find out and somehow it'll be a negative experience for me. And so I'd love to first share that, but also to say to the rest of the panel, this is one of those that we come across a lot. So when we're rattling the bell of awareness and stigma reduction and reach out for resources, and yet 50% of those are afraid to get that care from the improving coaching staff mental health.
And it could be because of playing time where maybe they don't appear like a leader. But I'll tell you, some of the things that we do before our Tyler talks with the student athletes is that we meet with the coaches, their staff, the ADs, the ATs, the mental health professionals. And these are championship teams. And we love it when those championship coaches say, I got to do more for my players. You know, they're winning year after year after year. How can I support my players better? How can I support the mental health of my players better? Because they get it. It's all connected, and they're going to have happier players, better athletes, better performing athletes if they just support the entire athlete, not just the physical part.
That's a great answer. Dr. Bird, Dr. Hainline, any thoughts about that issue, the issue of could we be doing more about educating coaches? Could we be doing more about certification in that area? And could we be doing more about the lack of trust that athletes feel in this area?
I'm happy to jump in, Dr. Hainline, and then pass the mic to you if that's all right. I'm excited. I'm kind of moving in my seat because I'm thinking about the value of talks like these where data leads or hypothesis leads emerge, right? So hearing about the number of students, athletes who don't prefer to utilize resources when they are available is an indication of, all right, generate a resource list in the community, right? Or again, using digital platforms outside of the immediate locale and say, here's someone else. If you don't want to use someone inside on the campus, here's a list of trusted, vetted providers, right? Maybe it's 3 or 4. And over time, the campus makes, better relationships with these people. And it's like, you don't have to come on campus and walk in to be seen walking into an office. On your own time, you can go somewhere or talk to someone on your screen. And so I think there are many, I'm just, again, appreciating opportunities like this to talk freely. And there may be people listening. Certainly myself, I'm taking notes for follow-up. And this is how we feed the machine that does better. So Dr. Hainline, I'll pass it to you.
Well, thanks so much. And I think I would emphasize 2 points. One is I already talked about the uniqueness of the United States and not having a minister of sport. The other thing that our country is unique in compared to almost every other country in the world is that to be a coach in the United States of America, all you have to do is hold up a shingle and say, I'm a coach. In Europe, you're undergoing thousands of hours of education, just as you have to if you're going to be a teacher in a school, because after all, coaches are teachers. So that's just a huge, huge lack in our country. But if we go back to the NCAA mental health best practices, the 4 core areas, and the one area is that everyone must rehearse routine and emergency mental health care seeking. That means that the coach, the athletic director, the student athletes, they're all sitting down and they're saying, if you have, these, I hate to call any mental health symptom routine, but if you're having symptoms of depression or anxiety, these are the resources we have for you. And that's rehearsed. More importantly is that there's a rehearsed mental health emergency action plan on every campus. A student who is suicidal, homicidal, psychotic, delusional, drug overdose, victim of sexual or interpersonal violence, that everyone knows immediately how to handle that situation. And just like when you're certified in CPR and automated external defibrillation, you know what to do immediately. You aren't thinking. That's how everyone should be when it comes to routine and emergency mental health care. And so, getting back to your point, Mark and Kim, about the 50% that that of student athletes who are hesitant to share. Well, that means that at the front end, the school has not properly rehearsed and really allowed everyone to buy in to what is legislated. That there should be a rehearsal of these, and that, and in essence, what we are saying is that every mental health concern should be treated as if it's a sprained ankle. You never let a sprained ankle go unaddressed because you know what can happen if you don't address it properly. It's the same sort of thing. So those are the 2 main points that I really want to emphasize. And and then is there hope with that? Well, look, in terms of coach certification, we're moving away from any sort of mandates in this country. And so I don't think that's going to come anytime soon. But there are some national governing bodies who are doing an incredible job. I will call out USA Football. What they provide for their coaches is nothing short of exceptional. And also an organization I'm involved with, U.S. Tennis Association, we're developing an exceptionally comprehensive coaching education program as well. But everyone needs to do that. And then in terms of, are the schools following what they should be doing? Again, I don't know that the NCAA is the right institution to check on that. I really believe we need an independent third party to help the schools get through with all of that.
I wanted, thank you very much for your answer. I want to go back to a question that was asked. It was the first one in my queue, and we'll also note as we hit the change in the hour, I want to be conscious of time. If there are people in the audience who want to ask a question, encourage you to get it in so I can give you some time to put that into the conversation. But the first one, Americans really care a lot about technology. One of the challenges I've always seen, particularly in the early diagnosis of CT, and you've really helped me at least think I was right when I said it before, that the celebrated cases of people who ended their lives because of it or had tragic outcomes because of it, in many cases was part of a larger syndrome and not a single underlying factor. But we often think about what's the cure, what's the simple answer, and we often grasp for that. And A question came up, are devices that are used in football and maybe other sports like the Q collar that have been developed to limit concussions, or Guardian caps that might reduce contact in certain ways. Are they showing significant results? Are we seeing significant improvement technologically, or are we seeing maybe other practices that are creating some improvement in reduction of harm and concussions or other issues? Anybody want to jump in on that one that has some thought on that?
Well, I might jump in because we really looked at that with the NCAA DoD Care Consortium and then all of the other devices that came up. So one thing that is really exceptional, and the technology is evolving on this, and that's a way of measuring repetitive head impact exposure. And we in the Care Consortium data, we actually were using with indirect ways of measuring it by way of helmet technology. So the best way to measure head impact exposure is if you put a microelectrode in the brain, right? But we're not going to do that. But the brain moves independent of the skull, and the skull moves independent of the helmet. So you're kind of 3 degrees away already. But there are evolving mouthguard technologies that are phenomenal. And what the NCAA Department of Defense Care Consortium demonstrated is that you can measure repetitive head impact exposure. And even on a football team, you can have 2 offensive tight ends that may have a tenfold difference in the amount of head impact exposure. So it's not position dependent. It actually is dependent on how you're utilizing your body properly. And are you leading with your helmet, or are you leading with the ground forces coming from your legs all the way up through your shoulders? So that is something that I think there's great hope as we continue to understand. And one of the things we learned unequivocally is that repetitive head impact exposure actually predicts concussion. You can have a minor impact and develop a full-blown concussion because you've had 6 repetitive head impact exposures before them. I'll talk a little bit about the Guardian cap. I think it's look, the NFL has developed some more position-specific Guardian caps, and yes, there is somewhat of a reduction in forces, but what's out there on the market is certainly not foolproof, and it certainly does not reduce rotational forces. And just like the helmet, sometimes you put on a Guardian cap and you think you're a little more invincible, and so we really have to look at that aspect of it. Q collar, I'll just say, let's not go there because the science is really poor and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But the other thing is that the biomarkers that are developing, I will predict with clinical certainty that in the next couple of years, there are going to be blood-based biomarkers at the sideline. And you're going to be able to look not only at the result of an impact or so on, but there are going to be predictive models using multiple biomarkers that are going to be able to tell us, hey, we need to really be careful here, or this is developing into a pattern that might be predictive of A, B, or C. So all of that is now a result of just a massive amount of data from the NCAA DoD Care Consortium. And I think over the next few years, we'll have even more advanced technology with the mouth guard, but also with the blood-based biomarkers, where we're going to be able to really just do it with a pinprick at the sideline.
Dr. Bird, you made a comment about biomarkers early on, I think, and I wanted to see how that would inform your practice and the ability to intervene or positively do things.
Yeah, neuropsychology is evolving alongside, even though it obviously predates the idea of biomarkers. And there are some in my discipline who are a bit, I don't want to say threatened, but when the diagnostic definitions change in favor of biomarkers and removes the cognitive piece, it doesn't mean that we don't have any utility. It means that science has evolved. That's my overall perspective. But right now, neuropsychologists are learning about the science of biomarkers, the utility in different groups, like providing the data about their ability to predict equally well in different groups, and how neuropsychologists can inform the what next. So I'm working on an early onset dementia project where we're collecting biomarkers remotely and returning the results. So that's another piece, thinking about dissemination and communication. How do we talk to people about what biomarkers mean? So we're working along with neuroethicists to say, how do we ethically return these data to people when we're still learning about what they all mean? So we collect them side by side, neuroimaging, blood-based biomarkers, and neuropsychological testing. So I don't have a definitive answer right now, but I can tell you we're here for the work and are ready to, grow with the science.
Kim and Mark, your work in education and advocacy is extraordinary. And this sort of comes from a question, but I'm gonna and maybe none of us are qualified to answer this at this moment, but um, Congress is active trying to pass legislation about NIL that deals with rights of students, that deals with the antitrust relationship between universities. And Dr. Hainline talked a little bit about the Ted Stevens Act and the creation of the Olympic movement. If you could talk to Congress from your perspective, Mark and Kim, based on the things you've experienced, what would you ask them to work on? What would be the things that you would ask them to do in a comprehensive way that might really improve life of student athletes?
I think, Bob, not to make light of it, but I don't think I'd ask Congress for anything if I needed it quickly. And in that I love my country. I love the process. I think so many of our congressional leaders get into it for the right way. What I'd slightly reframe it to say is we've had some success and it may be greater success at the state level. At the congressional level, at the state, as example, states like North Carolina, the great state of South Carolina, but even Alabama, we're just amazed at their they're known, they're a championship sports state, let's say. They have great care. We did a pilot 2 years ago on mental health education for their students, not student athletes, their entire student body. And their desire to bring those tools, educational materials to the schools in their state, ultimately within their different districts, blew us away. You think of progressive states, you think of guys that really invest in education. There is some amazing work that's going on. So we spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill, every year and sort of preaching, hey, listen, put your money where your mouth is, empower these kids, give them tools, give them resources, so forth. At the state level, you can really bring action there and then and encourage groups like Helsinki's Hope and others to bring to bear the research and the materials and the educational, in our case, educational elements that might give our students and our student athletes a greater chance. Kim and I always talk about moving the needle just ever so slightly in their favor. And you think about suicide and suicidal ideation and how important, incredibly important that is. And though not everybody with a mental health or mental health illness or mental illness obviously suffers from suicidal ideation, the great distress, concern, and fear that exists at every level. But let me last say this. We focus on high school and collegiate athletes, right? They're listening to these stories. As we ask educators in those states what they need from us, how can we help best? The most heartbreaking thing to hear is, thank you for all you do. You guys are amazing. What do you have for 5th grade? Because the amount of suicidal ideation is greater in 5th, 6th, and 7th grade in many of these districts and states than it is at the high school level. And it's soul crushing for parents that have lost a child, for parents that are going through something at that level. And so you have to rethink the research. You have to understand how to communicate with that level, that age level of the child. It's not the same as what we do in the collegiate space. So you work with experts, of course, right? Kim and I aren't that. So, but there are plenty out there, and there's some great ones that we've had the opportunity to work with to find the way to bring that message down to the 5th, 6th, and 7th graders, for example.
Dr. Hainline, I'm going to give you the same magical power of crafting a governmental solution or maybe governmental solutions, honoring what Mark just said about that maybe it comes from the state and local level too. Where would you put the emphasis on getting better outcomes in this space?
I think I would do a couple of things. One is, what's never mentioned in all of these articles that we read about for, legislation and not allowing students to be employees and getting antitrust protection and this and that. But one of the amazing things at the NCAA is the Sports Science Institute. And it's not just them in and of itself. They work collaboratively with every major medical, sports medicine, scientific organization in the country. And how can we find a way that what they recommend and what is, and sometimes legislated, sometimes is put as a Board of Governors policy, how can we ensure that that is incorporated into every school? We aren't asking that question to our leaders. And I remember at one point, there was talk about, well, the NCAA can't do this, and so we should put all of that under HHS. And that makes me, back then it made me very concerned, and today would make me very concerned as well. So again, it comes to a way of trying to figure out how we can help the school embrace and in a way, maybe it's almost an accreditation process. I mean, the schools are accredited in so many other things, but we don't do that for health, safety, and performance. So that would be my focus.
Dr. Bird, I want to come to you with a question again from the audience. That a lot of people don't use confidential support and are challenged. Is there a way to, and we know that creating a greater attention, calling attention, but would there be a way to remove stigma from seeking that help in any way? That is there a place where we could advertise it more, we could speak about it more, that we could advocate for it more? Is there a way from you in your mind to get us there?
Absolutely. And I think social media is one of those. There are a number of content creators whose sole purpose is to reduce mental health stigma. I think the use of celebrity is phenomenal, including celebrity athletes. So, music stars, I think about the number of rap songs that reference therapy these days. Like I thought, oh, I never thought we'd be here. Sesame Street, and thinking of the developmental, like a lifespan kind of, a life course rather, perspective. So yes, I think there are ways, and I think media is it because media is indiscriminate, right? It goes out to everyone. And so the more that people who have an audience can talk about it as if it's just like, oh yes, when I was in therapy the other day, something as simple as that reduces stigma. So there's some promising research, and I think our media platforms is a wonderful way to do that.
Can I just jump
I
in?
was calling on you, Mark and Kim. Go
Oh,
for
sorry. I was
it.
going to just share this story, and a school down in Texas when our son was playing in the SEC, and I won't name the school, but I love this so much because the sports psychologist was embedded in the sports, in the football locker room, right there when the offices where the ATs were. So Mark's there with them, and they're going, to where they all eat. And they're like, hi, doc, hey, how are you doing today? And I love that story so much because they weren't embarrassed to say hi to the sports psychologist, right? Because that person actually became part of their life, and they knew that seeing that individual was going to make them happier people, better players, right? And I think the embedded part is just so important that you go see your AT and then you also go see your sports psychologist. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about. And that stigma should not be there.
Well, I'm going to switch gears, but I'll make a reminder to the people who are listening, who've been with us from the beginning. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A area, and I'll try to do my best to ask it. I think I've asked almost everything that's come in some form or another. I apologize if I've editorialized a bit over them, but to keep them going with our conversation. But the controversial question came in, and I need to ask it, but I'm going to phrase it in a way that I hope gives you a chance to answer from your perspective. The controversial question came in: how can you, or how can anyone who speaks to a university president who has a responsibility for the well-being of the athletes on their campus, of the students on their campus, justify and you've said it's not just football, it could be any member, any sport on any campus that has some impact this way. how can they justify allowing sports programs that cause these problems to go on? And what would your answer be if they asked you that question? If you were talking across from a university president saying, I have this obligation, I have a duty to take care of my students, and how can I allow potentially injurious practices to continue? How would you, based on experience, answer that question? I probably come first to Dr. Hainline, who's probably had to answer that question at some point. How have you answered that in the past? And I'll give that to everybody at some point. I fear Dr. Hainline is frozen. And I actually do fear he's frozen a moment. Kim and Mark, would you take a shot at that? You talk to athletes. You've suffered loss and a void in your life in some measure based it connected to athletics, yet you come back to it and are prominent advocates for better, making it better. Talk to us how you got to that position.
No, thank you.
I've got Dr. Hainline back and he's live. Good.
There we go.
Dr. Hainline froze on a second. I'm going to go to that question with Mark and Kim, and I'll come back to you, Doctor, just for a second.
Okay.
How do you advocate for sport, and how would you talk to a university president about that?
Well, I'll give you our personal example. Seemed to be interesting to people, and although it was something that we had to live. When we lost Tyler, we had two other boys. We still do. Beautiful kids, Kelly and Ryan. Ryan was a senior, about to be a senior in high school, highly recruited quarterback, just like his brothers. And the question came up differently than you posed it, Bob, right? To us, you lost Tyler. Tyler, you were on the Today Show talking about the dangers of CTE. How in the world could you let your 17 or 18-year-old kid, play sports or play football for sure? And our answer was multiple pronged, right? One, we don't make all those decisions. This young man, Ryan, is beyond. He's an incredible kid, incredible athlete, an amazing child for us. We couldn't be more proud of Ryan. When we asked him, we shared that information. That's difficult to get. The Mayo Clinic calls and says, "Hey, I'm sorry to let you know, Tyler was diagnosed postmortem stage 1 CTE." As we're driving to Ohio State for a recruiting visit with Ryan. And so I'll speed it up, but the conversation we had, one, that's a decision he's going to be able to make when he turns 18, regardless of us, right? Number two, and I think this is the beauty and why we're so happy to be on these campuses, not just our children, all these young men and women playing sports for us in the collegiate level. Asked Ryan about it, and he said, what if I wanted to be a stunt pilot? What if I wanted to work in the explosives area? What if I wanted to join the military? You're going to keep me from doing everything that's potentially dangerous? Can you tell me that if I keep playing football, I'm going to have a greater likelihood or a certainty that I'm going to die from CTE? That's the discussion we had to have on a long road trip. And I'll tell you what, it made us closer. It made us scared. And it made us stronger, I think, as a as a family. It's emotional, of course, because these things really happen. This isn't a podcast or a webinar where we're talking
There's no
about
hypothetical here, right?
That's right, for us. And so I think it's an excellent question at the university level. And I think the answer has to do a little bit with, we don't make all those decisions. None of this is black and white that way. And we've got a lot of freedom of choice in this country. And we want to encourage that as well. So you have to educate, you have to share the information you have, tell the stories that you know, and let those that are impacted the most make the best decisions they can. That may be not a fair answer from a president of a university that we're talking about, but that was our experience, at least. I hope that helps.
I appreciate that. I'm going to go to the questioner's direct question, and I'll read it, Dr. Hainline. I hope our connectivity is good. And it follows up the question we asked about what would you say to a university president about a decision that might cause harm to their students. And it goes on to say adults can make their own decisions, but what's the purpose of a university? Should it promote a sport or any activity that causes brain injury? And I know you clearly have been asked that question. How have you answered?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I remember when I first proposed to the Board of Governors, which is the highest governing body for the NCAA, the NCAA Department of Defense Care Consortium study, and many people, in fact, many people told me to back off. They said, you might shut down the sport of football with this study. But I'll remember always when we were getting our early results in, and Bud Peterson, who was then the chair of the board of the Board of Governors and also the president of Georgia Tech, he said these words I'll never forget. He says, wherever Care Consortium goes, there must the NCAA go. And so we're developing a science-based approach to this. And as a result, our understanding of concussion has shifted so drastically. We used to think concussion caused CTE. And now everything about it is different. Our understanding of repetitive head impact exposure and how to mitigate that has shifted really, really considerably. And even the way that football practices are conducted have changed, but also our understanding that, we're looking at sports, we're looking at soccer, men's wrestling, especially within the NCAA, women's soccer, women's ice hockey, all of which have a greater rate of concussion than football, and all of which have a degree of repetitive head impact exposure. And so the real issue is what's the culture of safety and how willing are we to follow the science and the evolving science is really it's interesting and it's no longer so simple that, well, head impact exposure causes CTE. There are genetic and genomic predispositions to it. There are environmental predispositions, one of the most important being the metabolic syndrome, so obesity, hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, cardiovascular disease. Sleep disorders now unequivocally is a very strong contributor to CTE. So it's this holistic equation, and it's not to minimize the potential danger of head impact exposure, but putting it in a holistic context. I think if every university president can look at the environment and the culture that he or she ultimately is responsible for, that's really, I think, what needs to be done. And it's interesting. As I said, I'm going on to this conference in Edinburgh in a couple hours, and my talk is actually neuropsychiatric aspects of sport-related concussion. And so we have to present the most up-to-date data. And this doesn't prove anything at all, but professional football players who have played more than 5 years have a lower risk of suicide than the general population of their peers, and that those who have played a high school football have a lower incidence of mental health disorders and suicide than their peers who have not. And so that doesn't prove anything in and of itself. Those are just two important longitudinal studies. But I think we just have to let science lead the way, common sense lead the way, but especially the culture where we're all trying to put safety first in a holistic point of view.
Dr. Bird, I left you out of having to talk to the university president. I think you'll probably thank me later for that. But I do want you to respond to some of what Dr. Hainline just said about cultural, social, and other diversity factors playing in to one's susceptibility or the problems one suffers in a neuropsychological sense. Could you go there and talk a little bit about that from your work?
Mm. To understand, I want to be sure I understand your question because admittedly, I was very engrossed in both the Helinski's response and thinking about like how college presidents need to be at talks like these and need to talk to people, anyway.
Well, I'm going to let you answer that one if you want to. Go ahead.
No, I'm not prepared, but
Tell-
that would be my suggestion that the president sit down with the people who are impacted and then those who are serving them, right? Rather than just like reading reports.
I've been close to a number of university presidents, and I might even work with a few of them. And I could probably tell you they would almost all be advised to listen a little more than they speak.
Yeah.
And it might be a syndrome they have. Dr. Aidline went into the idea that there are correlative effects. There are what we know now isn't exactly what we thought always about this, that we're seeing correlative effects, we're seeing sociological effects, we're seeing positive effects in some areas too. And I know with your work in neuropsychology, looking at the social aspects, looking at different populations, how certain traumas, certain effects are differently felt. And I wanted to ask you about that.
Yes, this is because psychology is a science of constructs. So rather than like pathology, where you count certain microbes or something under a microscope, we're dealing with constructs that are what we say they are. And it means that even our best measurement is limited, really, and optimized by the person who defined it and then who designed the assessment instrument. Because we are assessing constructs, then the languages that people speak, the number of traumas that they live through, their immigration history, and so forth, impacts how they think about that construct, how they respond to a testing environment. And so we cannot interpret test scores as a numeric value in and of itself. And so that's what we're learning more and more. The social determinants of health are emerging very strongly, even in the performance on cognitive tests. And so I think the field is expanding with greater appreciation and respect as the science is evolving for the mechanism. We're not always clear on the mechanisms. We can measure the amount of effect that, like a neighborhood, right? How many bus depots are in your neighborhood? We're getting better at that measurement, even if not yet the mechanism. So we're well on our way.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Thank you all. I'm going to turn this back, I think, in a moment. I've asked, I think, most of the questions I have in the queue from our audience. I may have just had one pop into the queue. And, and I'll ask that one before we get to it. I'll ask you to be quick because we're down to about 6 minutes left in our program. But absence a real profession of coaching, since education is not required, is there a way for a coach who is a serial abuse, or is there no way for a coach who is a serial abuser of athletes to stop being recycled through school to school? Is there any conversation about what organizations and what entities should be responsible for accountability? And it's sort of a safe sport question and more in my domain. But I want to ask the experts. There are those who are out there. There are challenges and oftentimes abusive predatory coaches do exist in this space. Is there any way that you can see in your knowledge a way to create and protect that environment? And I'll ask it. Dr. Hainline came on, so I'll let him finish if he wants to take that one. I'll ask it. I'll rephrase it in a way that and turn it to the Helinskis in a way in a second.
Yeah, when I was chief medical officer, I had really pushed for an integration with the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, and we tried to figure out how we could do that. And so Safe Sport, they do have on their website. I mean, the coaches who have been, who are abusers, they're listed there. The problem is that Safe Sport uses a different level of evidence.
Yep.
And it's it's the preponderance of evidence rather than beyond a reasonable doubt. And so that just caused friction between the NCAA member schools and Safe Sport. So again, I don't know that I have a clear-cut answer to that, other than I'll go back to that sort of third-party independent entity that can maybe get involved in that sort of space as well.
Kim and Mark, I wanted to ask you, and not that you see this, and you've talked about how the vast majority of coaches are dedicated, good teachers who care a great deal about the kids that they work with. And I use kids not as a pejorative just because I'm older than them now. But the idea that if you ran across a bad coach out there, and maybe you have by now, how did you recognize that, or how did you see it, and what were the hallmarks of somebody who was a bad coach?
Yeah, I think our exposure is fairly limited, right? It's in our dealings, our sort of evaluation or assessment of coaches. Do they show up? In our world, right? In our context of sharing with their student athletes that we want them to be around tomorrow, that we want them to be able to enable each other to get through mental health crises together. Our evaluation of them, which is always ongoing, is very limited. So I don't know that we're certainly not the best ones to answer that particular question. Our guidance, I guess, on what we walk away with, this is what a great team, what a great group, right? It's a leadership, it's an accountability piece, it's an honesty and availability. So these guys manage their schedules down to the 30-second increment, and the ones that can spend more time on subjects that, like the ones we're talking about, get a lot of attention from us because that's the business we're in. So that's a poor answer to the question, but it's our exposure to the.
I thought it was a pretty terrific answer, and I'm going to say that thank you to all my panelists. I have about 3 minutes that I can use, which gives you about 60 seconds each to add one last word to this panel. I can't say thank you enough to each of you for sharing your stories, for adding your perspective. And Dr. Bird, I'll advocate for more education, because we came into this with possibly one idea and it has come out dramatically different. So I'll start with you, Dr. Hainline. Would you give me your 60-second what we haven't covered and what we should have?
I'll be brief. I'll say three things. One is thank you for the Drake Group and for the work that you all do, because you're really searching for truth. Second, it's just such a privilege to be with Dr. Bird and Mark and Kim and you, Bob. And what I'll finish with is, I think the most important thing we have to remember is that sport always is about our most sacred asset, and that's the athlete. And if we really remember that and honor that and are blessed with that, things will become more positive.
Thank you. Dr. Bird, I'll give you about the same 60 seconds if you wouldn't mind to share things that we should be doing more or have further review of, and things that have been missed.
Of course, not much has been missed here. I want to thank the organizers and all of you. My mind, I have so many notes and so many follow-ups. I think what my own takeaway, I can speak for myself, is to advocate for more resources and to creatively do so. Maybe it's retired players associations that can be approached about donating funds for dedicated, embedded mental health supports. And maybe even on my own campus, I can go and help cultivate a list of providers in the community that, student athletes can be referred to. So I'm on the hyper local, which has implications for a grander level. But thank you all, and this has been wonderful.
Kim and Mark, we began with the first word from you. We'd love to have you give the last word.
Yeah. Thank you, honestly. And then coming, on this podcast and being with these people that understand the brain so much more than I do, but coming in here from a Tyler Talk, hugging our student athletes, having them just cry. One of them was just sobbing in my arms because they saw themselves in Tyler's story. And so I'm so grateful that we get to be here, that we get to talk about Tyler, that we get to support the mental health of, of our student athletes. I wish I could have taken my son and taken him away, and that maybe they never played sport, but they fell in love with it, and it gave them so many good things. I wish my Tyler was still here, but I will always share his story and advocate for our student athletes.
Yeah, so grateful to be part of it and to meet Dr. Bird. We love Dr. Hainline and miss him. Hate to catch up this way. We have to be on a webinar together. Bob, it's been a super pleasure. And to the Drake Institute and Julie, thank you for inviting us. I hope we did made you proud a little bit. We're doing our best out here, always for the kids and the athletes.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thanks to all our attendees. We appreciate it.
Thank you.